Selma, Alabama, Bloody Sunday, 1965.
Presentation created and shown by Payal and Malynn.
There was three marches, and the first one had 600 people. The second march had 3,600 people, and then the last one had 32,000 people. There was 600 protesters in the first one, and the Alabama State Police and local police.
All the protesters were black, white, boys, girls. Even found a couple of like church pastors and deacons in the march, in some of our march pictures. And then the Alabama State Police and the local police were men and white. And we think that they were there because there were so many people, and normally a local police department isn't very big to stop 600 people from moving. And then in our picture, the boy that has vote written across his head could have been in white. It might have been the only color that actually shows up on his dark skin. But there's really no way to tell because the picture is in black and white.
The police knew that they were going against the Constitution. They were violating the First Amendment, the right to peacefully assemble. Protesters marched over a bridge, and then they were told back, but then they refused. They were beaten, and then they were driven back to Selma.
The bridge that all 600 protesters went over was the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And then besides beating and putting the dogs to the protesters, they also threw tear gas at them, which is kind of like a man-made pink eye, and it really irritates your eyes.
They wanted to end discrimination in voting.
Later in this year, which was 1963, their wish was granted as the Voting Rights Act was passed.
It took place March 7th, 1965.
And this Bloody Sunday was one of the many marches in 1965. And then Martin Luther King Jr. participated in one of the later marches. And where this line is right here is where the protesters marched from Selma to Montgomery.
It was from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, and the walk was about 19 hours.
And here you can see better the walk from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama, which Montgomery is the capital of Alabama, and that's why they were marching, was to talk to the governor about their voting problems. And the road that they walked along was US 80.
Lots of protesters were beaten, so it was bloody, and it happened on a Sunday.
And in this picture here, you can see that there's a man down here who was still in the middle of given a beating, while you can see other people running away from the police.
It sparked many of the protests and marches and attracted many other protesters to Montgomery.
Not only attracting other protesters, the march brought many known civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. to help earn blacks the right to vote. then later in the year, blacks got the right to vote equally by the Voting Rights Act that was passed.
40 people died in this march.
4 of the people, we found a couple of people that were on the memorial that was made, and these people were, one of them was a Baptist deacon, another was a minister, and one was a lawyer, and was a Episcopal seminarian. And this picture is actually of a white man who was beaten during the protests, and you can kind of see a little bit of his blood down on the collar of his shirt.
After the march, 100 of the 600 protesters needed medical attention. Blacks lived on one side of the bridge and whites on the other, and the protesters never fully made it across the bridge.
Besides having, some of the medical needs that some of these protesters had were broken skulls, teeth, and other bones. And then some of them still had gas poisoning from the tear gas that was not treated right away, and they also had whiplash from being thrown around in the stampede of 600 people running away from the police. And here are some other pictures from the protest. Like, this one is actually a white woman holding up a sign that says, "We shall overcome." And this picture down here is a side view of the Edmund Pettus Bridge with all of the protesters on it. And this picture down here shows a more frontal view of all of the protesters on half of the bridge with the police waiting for them. And the picture in this corner, you can see a man who is just finished getting beaten. And this picture up here, you can't really see him very well because of his jacket, but this is actually a white man who was helping a black man carry an injured black woman. And then here are all of our sources.